what I'd like to do is talk with you about our institutional data repository service at Purdue. It's called PURR, P-U-R-R, the Purdue University Research Repository. If you want to go to it, it's just purr.purdue.edu. I would advise you go right to that link and don't just Google the word PURR because you'll just get tons of photos of cats. So what I'm going to talk about is our repository service, and really kind of in the context of how we present it to our faculty, to our graduate students, to our staff researchers. And my favorite metaphor for this is the data cake. When we talk about the value of research data, sharing and management, the idea that, in libraries, we're very well versed with publications, with papers. We've been doing this for a long time. But this really only paints part of the picture, right? If you have the paper, it's kind of like having the frosted cake. But if you want to be able to reproduce the research, if you want to be able to bake your own cake, you need the recipe, you need the raw ingredients. And that these research data, they constitute those raw ingredients. And so we've been hearing throughout the day today about the value of research data sharing, that you need the data for reproducibility, to enable reuse, to create new knowledge, to be able to gain efficiency from sharing data and not reinventing the wheel, making the argument to our researchers that, that actually sharing data can be a form of scholarship and you can be attributed credit. Your data can be cited and you can get kudos and promotion and tenure and fame and fortune from data sharing. Some examples of data. We're talking about digital data and the kinds of things that you're all familiar with. All of the great arguments about data sharing that are altruistic are I think, fairly well understood by our researchers, certainly by our libraries, from our colleagues in IT and in the research office. But the real motivator, at least at my university, was when funding agencies began requiring data management plans. And so at Purdue, we had been working in the libraries with a lot of projects that related to data in a prototyping or in a research and development environment. So we, with help from the IMLS, we had a project called Data Curation Profiles. My colleague, Jay Carlson, initiated a project called Data Information Literacy that many of you maybe have heard of or participated in. I headed up a project called DataBib, which is a catalog of data repositories around the world, which just recently merged with another project called Re3Data. So you can go to re3data.org and find relevant data repositories. These kinds of things. DataCite. Purdue is a DataCite registration agency, so we are one of the 3 agencies in the US that can mint DOIs for data sets. So we had all these pockets of activity going on. Around the same time, the NSF began requiring data management plans to be submitted with grant proposals. And so when that happened, our vice president for research turned to our dean of libraries and said, hey, you guys know something about data. Let's work together on this. And that was really the genesis of PURR. We had done a lot of background work within the libraries, but when the time was right, then we were ready to go ahead and define and develop a system and a service for this. And so that's PURR. The important thing from a partnership standpoint is that this is not just a library thing. It's the libraries working with our vice president for research in his office, as well as our colleagues in sponsored program services and in research computing. And from the beginning, we had PURR designated as a core research facility. Okay, so this is, we treat this like a utility, like water, like electricity. You need to have this facility in order to be able to do research. And so on my campus, we have a whole list of designated core research facilities. These are usually things that are too big to be resources that could be acquired by any individual PI or center. They're meant to be shared, things just like our libraries, for example. And also we, from the beginning, defined our designated community as being Purdue University faculty, graduate students, and research staff, as well as their collaborators, potentially at other institutions, as well as current and future consumers of the data that they produce. And so if you were to go and look at our website at Purdue University Libraries, you would see that data is integrated in all 3 pillars of our strategic plan. And so you see the importance that this is to our organization. We view our libraries as having a stewardship role in keeping track of data as part of the intellectual record and integrating it into learning through information literacy outreach and instruction, in scholarly communication, so treating data as a first-class scholarly citizen, in leading in data-related scholarship and initiatives, as well as meeting global challenges related to eScience, data curation, data management, which is part of the reason why I'm here speaking with you today. So again, if you want to go to the website, here it is. I'm not going to overload you with screenshots because that can be kind of mind-numbing. I'll explain to you how the service works. If you want to right now on your portable electronic device, you can go ahead and pull the website out and check it out. So just like David and was talking about the research data lifecycle and thinking about where do libraries fit different parts of this lifecycle, we took a very similar approach. How many people have seen this diagram before? Right, so all the hands, everybody in the room. This is a great diagram, and there are plenty of these life cycle diagrams. They're all circular in nature. Everyone has their own, and they're great. And they're meaningful to us as librarians. It's my opinion that this is not very useful for researchers, though. I mean, they understand it on an intellectual level, but what they want to know is what can you do for them? What is the value that libraries offer to your research community? And so the way that we represent this, as it relates to the PURR service, is more like this. This is our postcard that we sent out to all of our faculty on campus. And this is what PURR can do for you as a researcher. And basically we've got 4 talking points, and I'm going to walk you through those talking points as I describe the service. Okay, the first thing is that if you need to write a data management plan that's effective and have the ability to implement it, PURR can help you. Number 2, if you're looking for an online space to be able to collaborate in your research, you can use PURR, which is an instance of the HubZero software, to do that. You can invite your collaborators and have an online space to be able to do your research collaboration. Number 3, PURR gives you the capability of publishing your data in a scholarly context. So with descriptive metadata for discovery, so people can understand the data, with a digital object identifier to facilitate the attribution and citation of the data. And then number 4, PURR provides you with an archive for your data. So if you've got a data management plan, you're thinking in terms of long-term stewardship of data, we have a very well-articulated, well-defined digital preservation strategy, digital preservation strategic plan, different levels of preservation support. We take very seriously our social contract that we have with our users so that they can trust us with their data and know what's going to happen to it in next year, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, and 50 years. So those are the 4 talking points, and I'm going to walk you through them each very quickly. So with regard to data management plans, if you're a researcher and you need to write a data management plan, you can go to PURR. There's some boilerplate text you can copy and you can paste it into your proposal. We hope that you will enhance it and that you will edit it. That gives you basic information about the service that we offer, and to be able to say to funders, we have institutional resources and support for data management and information and reference to that. We have example data management plans. We have a data management plan self-assessment that Jake also initiated, which are just a series of questions that a researcher can ask himself or herself about their data to help them think about and structure their data management plan. We participate in the DMP tool, which was referenced earlier, which is a wizard essentially that you pick your funder and it asks you a series of questions, and then answering those questions, it generates your data management plan at the end. We also conduct workshops on data management plan along with our Office of Research. We videotaped one of the workshops and put it online for people who couldn't attend in person. We have a variety of other tutorials. And the other thing that we do is we try to use PURR as an opportunity to connect our researchers to our data services specialists and to our subject liaison librarians. So if there needs to be some kind of follow-up consultation, we try to use PURR as a way of connecting them to their designated librarian. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that happens. So like I said, we're working with our research office. We've integrated this into our sponsored programs pre-award workflow. So when you submit a grant proposal from my university, you go through the sponsored programs office and it's submitted on your behalf. You fill out a worksheet that you put on the front of it. That worksheet includes a question. Are you required to have a data management plan? If you check yes, then it asks you, are you going to use PURR or are you going to do something else? And so this has become just accepted as part of the grant submission process. Probably the best evidence of this would be the newsletter that came from our research office that goes out to all of our researchers that basically describes the process for submitting a grant proposal at my university. And you can see in the middle where it includes that section. Okay, so that was number one, data management plans. Number two, creating a project and using PURR to collaborate on your research. So we're using the HubZero software. HubZero.org is the website. It's open source. You can download it and check it out. I'm going to talk more about the service and not really about the software, but if you've got questions about the software, I'm happy to answer them. We've also done, I should say, a number of videos. So you'll see these links down here. If you want to learn more information about each of these topics, you can just go watch the YouTube video to learn more about it. But this is what a project space looks like in PURR. Essentially what you do is you log on to the service, you create a project, you get a default allocation of storage, and then you can invite your collaborators to join the project. Basically, you put in their email address. It kind of works like Dropbox or Google Drive, where they get a link, they click on the link, and to join the project and have access to the project resources. And so what we say is that any Purdue faculty member, graduate student, or research staff can create a project. And in fact, you can create as many projects as you need. Essentially, you just give the project a title. You provide some metadata to describe your project. You have to disclose whether you're going to be working with sensitive or restricted data. And these are specifically defined terms at my university. And so we've got some sidebar text that tells you about what are sensitive data, what are restricted data. There are 4 kinds of data in particular that we're concerned about. We're concerned about data that or research studies that have IRB restrictions. And so we worked with our IRB office to put the appropriate text up there so that a researcher can say yes or no and basically self-validate that they're conforming with their IRB protocol. And then it will let them go on and finish creating the project. The second kind of restricted and sensitive data that we're concerned with would be HIPAA, private health information, personal health information. So we're at a medical school here, so I'm sure that there are people here who know much more about this than I do, but we have a HIPAA compliance officer at my university. We consulted with that person, and they said, no, you can't use PURR for this. And so if you check that you have sensitive or restricted data, and then you check that you are going to be working with HIPAA, it basically says you need to stop, you can't use PURR for this purpose. Same thing goes for government and export controlled data. We worked with, this is not expertise that we have in the libraries, we worked with our other staff at the university who are responsible for these kinds of data. And then the fourth kind of data relates to FERPA, student data, because many of our research subjects are students because we're a university. And in this case, our FERPA officer said that she wanted to be able to individually evaluate and approve or not approve new projects that were being created. And so we went ahead and set up a workflow for that. So if you check the box that says, okay, yeah, I'm going to be doing FERPA data, what it does is it sends her an email, it freezes the project, she gets a link, the FERPA compliance officer, she clicks on it, and she reviews it and says yes or no, and it either lets the PI proceed or not proceed to create the project. So I wanted to just talk about those 4 scenarios. So once the project is cleared and created, it gets a default allocation of storage. You can register a grant award, and that allocation is, you get a larger allocation of storage at no charge to your grant. You then invite your collaborators to join the project, and then when you're inside the project space, you have all the functionality of HubZero, which includes things like a Git repository to share and version files. It provides an SFTP interface and a Google Drive interface. So if you don't want to go to the website and upload your files one by one through a file explorer, you can use SFTP or you can use Google Drive. You can create virtual machines. You can write software and compile it all within this web-based environment. You also have things like wiki and a blog and to-do list and a news feed and all of these things that are kind of more project administration, collaborative communication type features. And then what we hope is that you'll use that space to not only do your research, but to stage public data publications to share your data. So let me talk about storage for a second. When you create a project in PURR, by default, you get 10 gigabytes of storage for your private project space for 3 years. You can create as many projects as you want. From within that project, you can publish up to 1 gigabyte of data. So those are the data publications that are openly accessible. And what we say is that we make an initial commitment of 10 years to supporting those published and archived data. What happens at the end of 10 years is that the data are remanded to the library's collection, and we'll apply whatever our current collection policies and best practices are in determining, how we move forward. We realize that we can't keep everything forever, and there are too many of these repository services that just the preservation proposition is, well, just trust us, we're the library. And so what we say is, well, you can't base a budget on that, and if you're going to have that social contract with your users, this is the best that we can do, is we can plan and we can budget for 10 years and say we have a professional practice that is informed and can help us make some of these selection and deselection decisions and a timeline for it. So we picked 10 years. I don't know if that's the right amount of time, but that's what our model is set up to support. So again, by default, you get the 10 gigabytes of data. You can publish up to 1 gigabyte of data. If you have a grant award and you go into your project, you can click a link that says register my grant, and you'll go from 10 gigabytes of data for 3 years up to 100 gigabytes for 10 years, or the life of the grant. And then you can publish up to 10 gigabytes. This is just an incentive for sponsored research. We're not charging the researchers any additional money. We're not charging the grant for it. It's just to incentivize grantsmanship. But what we say is, if you're going to need more than the 10 gigabytes or more than the 100 gigabytes, beyond that, so that we don't get clobbered by big data projects, we have a per gigabyte per year pricing. So you or your department or your grant can pay for additional storage. So number 3 is publishing data sets. This is what a published data set looks like in PURR. I'm not going to go through the data set submission process because it's probably already familiar to you. It looks very much like it does in our institutional repositories, where you choose the files, you give it a title, you select the authors, you provide an abstract and subject tags, and choose a license and go ahead and submit it for publication. You'll see that we have a data site, digital object identifier, descriptive metadata about the data set. We track citations to data and add them. So when we find that other people have cited a data set, we'll go back and add it. We have 2 different kinds of citation. We have self-citation, where the researcher is citing his or her own data. And then we have non-affiliated citations, which is when other people are using that person's data. I can talk more about that later if you're interested. So once the data are published and they become publicly accessible, we archive the data, like I said, for up to 10 years. The way that we do this is when the data set is published, we serialize an archival information package. We use the Bagot specification from the Library of Congress, the California Digital Library, and the University of Virginia came up with this specification. It uses, we capture metadata using METS, MODS, and Dublin Core, as well as premise preservation metadata. We create that AIP, and then we replicate it to 6 other geographically dispersed sites using the Meta-Archive Cooperative's LOCKSS network. So LOCKSS is lots of copies, keep stuff safe. This is our digital preservation backend that we use. So I won't go into too many more details about digital preservation. You can ask questions if you'd like to know more. So in terms of how we govern the PURR service and our level of staffing, like I said, it's a true collaboration among libraries, the research office, and IT. And so at the highest level, we have an executive committee that is just 3 people. It's the Dean of Libraries, our CIO, and our Vice President for Research. And these guys, they meet maybe 2 or 3 times a year. It's mostly high-level resourcing issues, policy issues. They hear a report from me on how PURR is going and that kind of thing. But it lets everybody know in all of these 3 different organizations, all these 3 different silos of IT and libraries and the research office, or my favorite term is cylinders of excellence, silos, that we are working together in this. and that this is supported from at the highest level in the university. So in a more operational basis, on a monthly basis, we have a PURR steering committee that includes 2 representatives from libraries, 2 from the research office, 2 from campus IT, as well as 2 or 3 or 4 researchers who represent our users who are doing data-driven research to kind of represent user interests. And then we have the PURR team. I'm the project director, half-time. We have approximately 4 FTE who are doing software development, web development, DBA, security expert, those kinds of tasks. One of those FTE is in the library. The other are in campus IT. We have a Hub Zero liaison. This is our person who helps with trouble tickets and issues and upgrades for our repository platform. We have a metadata specialist in the libraries who helps our users determine what the best standards are for description and to implement them. We have a digital archivist who has designed the digital preservation policies and infrastructure that I just described and consults on an ongoing basis. We've got a repository outlook specialist. This position is currently vacant, so we're also hiring just like Hopkins. But this is basically kind of the go-to person for PURR, who can give talks and can work with researchers and work with librarians and help them use the system and help us continuously improve it. And then we have a full-time data curator within the libraries. His focus is primarily on existing data collections and how do we refactor them and ingest them into PURR for the purpose of stewarding them. And so these are the folks who are kind of behind PURR. The executive committee meets once a semester. The steering committee meets once a month, and then the PURR project team meets on Thursdays. The other folks who are really key players would be our data services specialists. So PURR is a significant component, but it's not the totality of our data services. We have lots of other services that we offer. So we work with our data services specialists on integrating those with PURR. And then, of course, our subject specialist librarians who are really on the front lines and who are embedded in the departments, know the faculty, understand the culture of research, and can help connect kind of the last mile to the service to the users. And so one thing I'd like to talk about is how we're trying to leverage PURR as a way of helping our liaison librarians open doors with their faculty and with their research communities, and to give them opportunities to interact with researchers about data. And so this is essentially the PURR workflow here, just as a workflow diagram. So in the first place, our librarians can and are consulting with researchers on their data management plans. Every time a new project is created in PURR, our subject liaison gets an email message that just lets them know. And so we look at the department affiliation of the faculty member, the graduate student or staff who created the project, and the corresponding department. We route to the subject liaison and just basically says, hey, Dr. Jones created a project in PURR. It's not an obligation necessarily to go knock on his or her door, but it's just trying to give them the opportunity, if they didn't already have one, to go and knock on the door and have a conversation about data. Our librarians sometimes are invited to join the projects or are collaborating with the researchers, all the way from just reviewing a data management plan all the way up to, in some cases, being co-PIs on grants that really are managing significant amounts of data. When data sets are submitted for publication, they're not made immediately accessible. We actually copy our subject liaisons on the metadata record and the data files for them to review them. It's a quick review, and it's not a peer review, but they're essentially looking to see, is this an appropriate use of the system? If the researcher said this is an Excel spreadsheet, is it really an Excel spreadsheet? Does it have a full and complete metadata record? These kinds of things. But again, our librarians, this is a function of collection development, essentially. So they're reviewing and posting the submitted data sets. And then at the end of the initial commitment, at the end of 10 years, we're only 3 years into this now, but what we envision is that the subject liaisons will work with our digital archivist to make the selection and deselection decisions to apply our collection development policies to these data sets. So those are some ways that we're trying to leverage the service to create more opportunities for our librarians to interact with researchers on data. In terms of where we are now, here are some early indicators. We've been in full operation with PURR just a little over 2 years. We track the proposals that get submitted from our institution, and so we know exactly how many include PURR as a component of the data management plans, 1,405. This seems like a good number. We also track the awards, and so we know that to date 163 of these grants have been awarded, 1,300 registered researchers, approaching 500 research projects. Most of them are active. You always have people who just want to create a project and just like kick the tires and check it out. And like I said, we've been trying to, as best as we've been able, to identify citations to data sets to see if we're having scholarly impact. And so far, I mean, we just find some citations. We hope this number will grow as the data sets have been available longer and as we publish more data through the system. And so one of the things that we wanted to look at was, you know, for folks who are at Purdue who are using PURR, how many of them are using PURR, how many of them are using other solutions. And so a couple years ago, we looked at about 6 or 7 months worth of NSF proposals coming from Purdue, and just did some basic analysis of the data management plans. And we found that about half of our researchers are using PURR, 29% are using a local computer or a department file server or some other local resource. 14% were using some disciplinary repository, and then 8% were projects that weren't really truly generating data, or you get some kind of like oddball, you know, DMPs also, especially in the early days. And so we feel like these are good early indicators of success. However, it's still early days. Like David said, kind of going from infant to adolescence, I think that we probably feel like we're just entering adolescence now too, because our process has been one of iteration and improving. There are some things that we've definitely gotten wrong along the way, that we've made adjustments and tried to make the service better as we've gone along. And so with that, I'll go ahead and conclude and take any questions along with David. Thank you.